Parents of killers. What's your story? Most of my family members are 99% sure that my cousin killed his best friend when they were 12 years old. He was always a very strange child, prone to violence. One day he tried to beat up my other cousin while canoeing, or sprayed him, and his father went to the police for the children. Two people were alone in the river. My cousin returned and very calmly told his parents that his friend had drowned. The child had signs of blunt force trauma to the head, but my cousin proved that he slipped and fell, and Duran's medical worker proved that it was not a wound caused by sliding, but simply, however, in the fall, my cousin had an excellent lawyer, and he was released. I would no longer communicate with this part of the family. For some reason, I am afraid to think that he is a free man. My great-aunt was dating a guy, and this guy really wanted to have a physical relationship with her even before the wedding. It was in Italy in the 30s, in a remote town. They say physical intimacy in the movies instantly turned you into a towness. Anyway, he promised to marry her if they did, and she agreed. Well, a few days later she sees him flirting with another woman, so she goes home, grabs her father's gun and seduces him, and then kills him on the street. She received several years in prison, and a year later happily married 5 children and moved to Toronto. My son killed a family friend when he was 17. A family friend polished him from the age of 7 to 12 before finding another boy when he was 17. He came across this man, offered him physical intimacy, and my son couldn't stand it, stabbed him in the heart. He had a heart attack and he died. He died of a heart attack, served 8 years for manslaughter. His life turned into ruins. He wanted to leave, go to college and get a job. It was too hard for him because he was among children his own age. He was more worried about what to do on a Saturday night. At that time, while he was worried about him, he was not himself. He got his degree in psychology on Saturday night and still couldn't find a job. He even found a job at an organization that helped ex-prisoners. I was 3 years old. My grandparents took full care of me. My father was an avid alcoholic, as far as I understand. My mother was to some extent the same, but my father was much worse. My mother also had many health problems. I do not know all the details about her health, but she definitely had health problems. She had a defective arm, but she was a very beautiful and kind woman. She was like a person if she had all 10, and when she returned home, everyone had something. My father killed her in one night. I do not know this story. All I know is that he partially dismembered her, but could not completely disassemble her, but he thought I was trying. He made a large wound from waist to waist, partially severing his head and arms. The next day, he called the police, according to the testimony of one of the witnesses. A neighbor, my grandfather, finally suspected for 3 days that something had happened. He came and drank beer, watched football, and did not even seem like a changed person. I am now 21. My father is going to serve at least 8 more years. After 10 years in prison, he had a chance for parole after 15 years, but he was refused. But he was able to serve his whole life until I turned 18, when I ended up in prison. I was lied to and told that it was, in fact, an accidental death, until I Googled my father's name when I was 11 years old. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, and it was just before Christmas. My first memory is when I look at my mother's closed gray-blue coffin. Of course, this is not my child, but my stepfather's child, whom we call Jay. He committed a series of murders. He wanted to kill the whole family. He successfully killed both his maternal grandfather and his brother's grandfather. He left his gray barn to live and was tied up, so he was caught in the middle of a murder. After he left and called the police and his mom, she was free, and she was next on the list. Jay stole his great-aunt's phone to pretend to be her and meet his mom. As a result, he met with the police instead. He tried to go to visit other relatives, but it was in the middle of work, and people were not at home. Otherwise, he would have killed even more people before he was caught. He received 100 years with 0 chance of parole. The judge said the sentence was symbolic because by the time it was over, there was no one left alive who could remember his heinous deeds. Not me, but my mother had a relationship with one of the first serial killers/pedophiles in the mid-80s. Why Mom started dating this guy. My sister already had another man. The new guy was a loving stepfather. They lived in Las Vegas. My mother played Keno, and he was a card cashier. He was blacklisted by most casinos for the aforementioned card counting, so she helped him disguise himself. I got together. They continued to be a happy little super dysfunctional family until the FBI took my mom away from work and interrogated her for hours about him. He is a rapist/pedophile/murderer. My mother didn't know. She was involved in petty crime, but that wasn't the case. I left the city with our children and returned with my sister's father. I grew up not knowing this until I turned 14 and my parents divorced. My father asked for a DNA test for me, and I ended up on the floor. Your father is not your father. In fact, he is an evil man sentenced to death. My mother is an avid alcoholic and drug addict. Everything I know is contradictory, because she can't even talk to me about it without going into a complete mental breakdown. She died 4 years ago. I look through her materials and find an email from the History Channel asking me to contact her and take part in a documentary about him. One thing that gets to the bottom of my soul: he called her by the name of his first victim during physical intimacy. She swore she didn't know about it until it happened, and I believe her. My uncle raped and killed his disabled daughter and tried to frame someone else to get insurance. He has been hiding from this for almost 20 years. One day my father called me and said that we should expect the family's name to be mentioned in the news. My uncle raped and killed his disabled daughter and tried to frame someone else to get insurance. He has been hiding from this for almost 20 years. One day my father called me and said that we should expect the family's name to be mentioned in the news. One ex-fiancé, 7 years together, he started dating him without my knowledge. 5 years old and 2 children. He knows that I love him. He tried to help him. When I found out about it, he dumped him because he refused. He was caught in the victim's car. He admitted that he received 12 days of life and 10 days before the trial. He said he wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. I am raising 2 children. They still don't know. I don't plan on telling them until they're old enough. They're killing me because they have to live with such a burden. This is very unfair. They certainly didn't deserve it, and neither the victim nor his family deserved it. First of all, he was a man who helps the homeless, generous, sociable, overly intelligent and ambitious. He was also one of the most important people in his life. He told how hard drugs can turn people into monsters. It's horrible. I hope it won't affect your children too much when they find out. It's a good thing you left before he went crazy. My foster sister was in a car accident this weekend, and her treatment was successful. She will be taking medication this weekend to deal with her epilepsy. I do not know why she did not take her medication. She really took advantage of the magnificent small and hit a mother and her 2 children on sidewalks and pedestrian crossings. She killed her mother and her 2 children. Her 2 children were crushed to death, and her mother is still in the intensive care unit. My sister is also in the hospital, and we don't know if she's going to jail for an accident. What if Mom survives and realizes that the children are dead? When I was 10 or 11 years old, my brother and I went for a walk at the hotel, visiting my grandparents. We were told that our mother had passed away and our father would be sent to prison. It took me a while to figure out what happened. I found out the whole story when I was 15 years old. Dad was asleep. Mom tried to smother him with a pillow. As a result, he attacked her, which led to her death. According to the newspaper article, he hid her body in the woods, and according to the police, they would not have found the body if my father had not told them about it. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He got out of prison 5 years ago, got hooked on drugs, got hooked on fentanyl, he overdosed and got the flu. I was fine. It's hard for me to express emotions in my relationship, but my movies make fun of me and say they work for me. My great-aunt killed her husband many years ago. After shortening his height and being mistreated for many years, the house was burned to the ground. From what I know, she was convicted but did not receive a prison sentence. Instead, she came and worked in the prison kitchen so that she could return home and take care of her children. Most of her children used drugs or something like that, so my family never talked to them, and we don't really talk about it. My brother-in-law killed one of his bullies in high school. He has cleft palate, and it's a pretty serious disease. He has been bullied all his life because of this. His mother and I did everything we could to stop the bullying that never stopped. We contacted the administrator, moved, changed schools and tried all the options. In the end, we settled on an online homeschooling program. Unfortunately, one of his bullies from his last school knew where we live. He came and regularly bullied my son-in-law. My wife and I were never around because the kids came when we were at work. One day, after my son tried to ignore his previous provocation, the bully decided that it must be a good idea to break into the house and find him. He threw a brick through the window behind us, which was in the guest bedroom, and tried to get in. Now I partly blame myself for what happened next. Since I enrolled, I've been doing everything in my power to fill out the questionnaire, because my son didn't know his real father, and we've become quite close. Eventually, I began to trust him enough to tell him where I put the gun. I wanted to see how his mother and I often work so that he can protect himself if something happens if we're not there. Then he grabbed my gun, opened the door behind which the bully was, and shot him in the chest 2 times. He died before an ambulance arrived at the scene. No charges were brought against my son because there was obvious evidence of forced entry, and a neighbor claimed that the bully repeatedly stated that he was going to kill my son when he entered the house. This happened almost 15 years ago, when my son was 10 years old. Since then, he has contacted many psychologists and psychotherapists. Something changed in him that day when he blamed himself for years. He tried to isolate himself from the world, became an avid alcoholic, and even tried to commit suicide. He blames himself for taking another person's life, even though he knows he is in danger. To see what happened to my son is just heartbreaking. I sold the gun, but I still haven't bought another one. There is still sadness and guilt in his eyes. I'm starting to believe that so many tears will never help me get rid of this feeling. My brother killed his girlfriend right after his son was born. He still won't tell me why he did it, but he confessed and never denied it. He will remain in prison until 2046. Finally, it was confirmed. We always knew that eventually he would have problems with the law, but at an early stage it was not his parents, but he was addicted to drugs, so his parents did not give him money for his bad habits, so he could easily become a neighbor of a family that had sons who had killed them. It was not a parent, but one of my cousins is a murderer. For some unknown reason, this man was a teenager when he decided to kill his parents and brother. I can't pronounce his name, so let's call him John. It was early in the morning, about 3 o'clock, and my father was working the cemetery shift at one of the gas stations in the city. John stayed up all night to make sure everyone was sound asleep. He took the shotgun given to him for his birthday and crept down the hallway to his brother and sister's room to make sure they were asleep. Satisfied, he entered his mother's room, put a gun to her temple and shot her. The explosion woke up his brother. He turned around and shot at his brother as he ran out of his room. After making sure he is dead, He finds his sister hiding in the closet and kills her to make his crazy fantasy come true. John dragged the bodies one by one into the living room and left them there. Then he called the police and reported the murder. According to family legend, a policeman found him sitting on the couch watching cartoons or eating cereal, but there was still blood on his body. It's been a few years now, and the only reason he was assigned to do this was because he just felt it was the right thing to do. It was. My cousin, who lived apart from me, killed his girlfriend's 4-year-old son. It's weird to think that the same guy treated me like a friend. He knew his life when we met at a reunion many years ago. One guy from where I grew up beat his girlfriend's 4-year-old son to death for spilling juice on his Xbox game console. My wife's grandmother had 3 sons, one of whom died, and one spent 30 years in prison for murder. She still leaves everything to him at will, because he is a better person than the other surviving brothers. I work in a restaurant, and the killer's father is one of our regular customers. It's a trendy restaurant. The man is very rich. He and his wife live separately, and he always had many girlfriends who were more than 20 years younger than him. He pays for their apartment and plastic surgery. He gave one of them a gold necklace with the inscription "E Gold Digger," and allowed her to wear it in public. We don't have much respect for women. This guy is loud, insinuating, elderly, looks like a businessman. In any case, his son is the same man who killed his wife's friend and drank all her blood. I do not know what Dad feels inside, but outwardly he has not changed, his lifestyle and demeanor have not changed, but the habit has remained. I'm an outsider, of course, but he won't even know it happened when it happened. They have just been ordered to pay the family $44,100 million. Not a parent, my colleague and her son were killed by her second son almost 2 years ago. So, the killer's son spent most of his adult life in prison and behind bars, committing minor crimes, destroying and breaking into a house, robbing, etc. There is nothing violent about it. His last dismissal was related to credit card fraud. My colleague didn't want him to live with her when he left, but in the end he stayed with her and her second son. My colleague is an elderly woman in her 70s. You could rely on her. She didn't miss work and at least she didn't get a call when she was late. She didn't show up for her shift on Friday, and it wasn't like her. We tried to call her, but we don't have a cell phone because she was in her 70s, and it was just another useless piece of junk. No one answered, and we thought, oh no, maybe she forgot or was in the hospital and couldn't call. But despite the fact that something was wrong with my boss and me, we brushed it off because our long-standing forensic materials did not allow us to make the most of it. Monday came, but there was no call or appearance. Now I'm going crazy, so I went to the police to check on my health. 4 hours later, we saw the news that 2 bodies had been found in her neighborhood. I drove her home from work 100 million times. That she didn't drive, that the car was missing, that the credit card was missing. The killer's son was found in New York State and arrested for violating the conditions of parole. I'm still worried about it. She was a very good woman. She didn't deserve it. The investigation is still ongoing, so put it out of your mind. In this case, I am not a parent, but only a sibling. I have a stepsister, 1 full sister and 1 stepbrother. My relationship with my mother was strained, and I didn't know much about my stepbrother. I knew that it was difficult for my stepsister to grow up and talk, and my stepbrother suffers from autism. My mother died recently, and I received a lot of information from roommates, family members, etc. My stepsister bullied our mom in every possible way. She also threatened to kill my mother when the situation was not resolved in any way, a few months before her death. My stepsister killed my mom's roommate's dog in a fit of rage after she was denied something. She didn't get in trouble because the dog wasn't considered property, so she wasn't sentenced to a long prison sentence, and my maternal grandmother didn't pay royalties to her roommate and for keeping the dog. I won't ask how my stepsister killed the dog, because the fact that she could harm even a pet made me sick. They also reported domestic violence to the local police, because my stepsister was abusing my mother. They have some records, and they have to come and check it out. Shortly before that, there was an incident with a dog. Mom died because my roommate said my stepsister didn't want to go to school, and they had a fight. At that time, my mother was already sick and weak. Suddenly, the next room became quiet, and then my stepsister started calling for help. My roommate came running and found my stepsister sitting on my mother's body. It took 4 months to get the autopsy results. I wasn't sure if my mother was already sick or something, so they announced that the cause of her death had not been determined. The police officers we talked to were honest with me, and we both felt that my stepsister had something to do with it. Given what I know and the recordings I've seen, I believe my mother was killed by my stepsister. I'm sorry, I can't imagine what you're going through. I wish you all the best. You have been visited by luck like this article, which allows you to enjoy it for 26 minutes. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. Until then, we will be releasing new videos every day. Watch another video or not. Anyway, have a nice day, wonderful people.